All right, we're jumping into a really fascinating challenge today. Imagine you've built this incredibly smart custom AI solution. We'll call it InvoiceBot. And it works perfectly. But now, your company wants to move it onto their big enterprise standard platform, UiPath. This isn't just about moving some code. Nope, we are talking about translating an entire philosophy from a quick AI-first approach to the superstructured world of Enterprise RPA. And really, this is a story about a clash of two very different ways of thinking.
And that brings us right to the heart of the matter, the central question of this whole exercise. How in the world do you translate the intuition of an AI into the rigid, step-by-step procedural logic that RPA demands? This is the core puzzle we have to solve, turning that holistic AI reasoning into a detailed, explicit blueprint. You know, to really get this, you have to see it as a tale of two philosophies. On one side, you've got InvoiceBot. It relies on AI reasoning, it learns from feedback almost instantly, and its technical footprint is super simple. On the other side of the coin, you have the UiPath platform. Here, everything is built on explicit, hard-coded logic. Learning isn't instant. It's a formal model retraining process. And it all sits on this massive enterprise infrastructure. These differences, they're going to shape every single decision we make. So, here's our game plan for breaking this down. We'll start by mapping all the components, piece by piece. Then we'll compare the two architectures side by side. After that, we'll walk through a detailed 5-month migration plan. We'll even tackle the toughest part, how to replicate the AI's magic. And finally, we'll wrap up with the key risks and strategic things you have to consider. Okay, let's roll up our sleeves and get technical. You know, the very first step in any kind of translation is building a dictionary, right? We have to map every single function from InvoiceBot to a specific product or service within that huge UiPath ecosystem. This is where the big idea starts turning into a real concrete plan. This table right here, it really tells the whole story. What was a simple email fetch using an API call? Well, that now becomes UiPath's integration service with formal connectors from Microsoft 365 and SQL. The AI brain that was reading PDFs, Claude Vision, that gets replaced by UiPath Document Understanding. And that simple dashboard for human review, it totally transforms into the enterprise-grade action center. See the pattern? A single nimble function in InvoiceBot often expands into a much larger, more complex component in UiPath. It's a one-to-many kind of translation. And this slide, wow, this just perfectly highlights that philosophical divide we talked about. Just look at how each system learns. InvoiceBot's approach is almost organic. A person makes a correction, it's saved to a database, and a simple nightly script updates the AI's memory. No developers needed. The UiPath way, though, is this formal multi-day ordeal. A correction creates a labeled dataset. Then a developer has to manually kick off a retraining pipeline in the AI center, test the new model, and then deploy it. One is automated and agile. The other is structured, controlled, and very manual. All right, let's zoom out a bit. We've mapped the individual parts, but now let's look at the whole machine. We're going to compare the overall data flow and the actual infrastructure footprint you'd need to run each of these solutions. This is where you see the real-world impact. So the data pipeline for InvoiceBot is just beautifully simple. An email comes in, the PDF gets read, the data is checked against the database, and output is generated and inserted into a SQL staging table. An email reply goes out, and then a human can review and approve it before it ever gets posted to the AI external. It's just one clean, logical, linear flow. Now, hold that simple image in your mind and contrast it with this. This is what it takes to do the same thing in UiPath on-premise. You're not just installing a single program. Oh no, you are building an entire ecosystem. You need a dedicated orchestrator server, developer machines with Studio, a whole fleet of virtual machines for your unattended robots, a separate server for the AI center, its own dedicated SQL server just for orchestrator's database. I mean, the list of infrastructure dependencies just keeps going. The operational complexity absolutely explodes. And here it is, side by side. The operational footprint really says it all, doesn't it? InvoiceBot runs on 3 core components. The UiPath equivalent? You're looking at 6+ major enterprise systems that all have to be installed, configured, managed, and patched independently. You're literally moving from a simple set of tools to a heavy-duty infrastructure platform. Okay, so how do you actually build this beast? What does the project plan even look like? We're going to shift gears now from architecture to execution. We're laying out the timeline, the effort involved, and the actual people you need to make this whole migration a reality. The first number you need to know? Around 21 weeks. That's just under 5 months, from start to finish. This number alone should tell you something really important. This is not a quick copy and paste job. This is a substantial, heavy-duty development project, especially when you think about the goal of scaling this thing to handle over 6,600 invoices every single month. Let's break that down week by week. The first 2 weeks are literally just for setting up that complex server environment. But look at the real heavy lifting here. Check out that huge block, a full 6 weeks from week 7 all the way to week 12, dedicated just to rebuilding the core invoice processing logic. That's where the most complex brain-draining work is. Then you have another big chunk of time for building the human review process in Action Center. And this is critical, 3 full weeks of user acceptance testing before you even think about going live.
And who's going to do all this work? Well, you need a senior UiPath developer full-time for the entire 21 weeks. This person is going to be living and breathing UiPath Studio. Alongside them, you absolutely need a part-time business analyst to translate the business rules and coordinate all that testing. They're also key for defining user roles in Action Center, like making sure the person validating the data isn't the same person giving final financial approval. And of course, you'll need help from your DBA and IT admin for all the database and server stuff.
All right, now we've arrived at the hardest part of this entire migration. Seriously, this is the part that will make or break the whole project. How do you replicate the AI's magic? I'm talking about its nuanced, contextual decision-making. How do you build that inside the rigid, step-by-step world of RPA?
The challenge here is just fundamental. An AI like Claude uses what's called a context window. It sees everything at once: the invoice text, the vendor's history, the delivery address, past human corrections, and it makes a holistic judgment call in a single pass. UiPath simply can't do that. It works through sequential activities. Each piece of data is a separate variable processed in a separate step. The developer has to manually explicitly code every single connection and decision branch that the AI just figures out on its own.
So what does that actually look like in UiPath Studio? To replicate the AI's knack for figuring out an ambiguous project code, you're not writing one elegant piece of code. You're building a massive workflow, a state machine with over 30 different activities. One activity to query the database for past corrections, another to check historical vendor patterns, a third to match the delivery address. You'll probably even need a custom invoke code activity with C# just to score and rank the potential candidates. It's a massive, sprawling web of if-else logic, all just to replicate one intuitive leap the AI made. And remember that simple, automated feedback loop from InvoiceBot? Well, rebuilding that is basically a mini project all by itself. In UiPath, you first have to create a custom SQL table just for the corrections. Then you have to design the forms in Action Center for the reviewers. Then you have to build a whole separate automation whose only job is to do that nightly sync. And after all that, a developer still has to go in, manually trigger the AI Center training pipeline, and manage the deployment of the new model. What was one automated step becomes this multi-part, manually intensive dance. And here's a crucial point that so many people get wrong. How do you get the final approved data into your ERP system, in this case, AX 2012? The robust recommended way is using a staging table. The data is saved to a database, a human approves it, and then a native X++ batch class inside AX imports it directly. This is stable, it's secure, and the performance is great. The common RPA alternative is screen scraping, where the bot literally just pretends to be a person typing on the screen. This approach is incredibly brittle. One tiny UI update in AX, and your whole automation shatters. This single architectural choice can literally determine the long-term stability of the entire solution. Okay, so let's start to bring this all together. Let's summarize the biggest technical hurdles, and more importantly, the strategic trade-offs that a company has to really think about before they take on a migration like this. Because this isn't just about technical feasibility anymore, this is about business strategy. These are really the 4 horsemen of this migration project. First, that AX 2012 connectivity. There's no off-the-shelf UiPath connector, which means you're writing custom code and direct SQL queries from day one. Second, as we've hammered home, replicating that core AI logic for the project code is by far the hardest part of the entire build. Third, that feedback loop has to be completely re-architected from the ground up. And finally, even something that sounds simple, like creating a nicely formatted HTML email, becomes surprisingly tricky and often requires custom .NET code. This chart really drives the point home about where all the effort goes. Just look at that. A full 20%, the biggest single slice of the pie, is just for rebuilding that complex logic for non-PO invoices. When you add in the document understanding setup and all the testing, you find that nearly half of the entire project timeline is consumed by just trying to replicate the intelligence of the original bot. And finally, let's talk about the money. The difference in the 3-year total cost of ownership is, well, it's staggering.
The custom invoice bot solution comes in around $24,000. The full Enterprise UiPath platform, once you factor in licenses, infrastructure, and all that development time, you're looking at over $500,000. That is nearly 25 times more expensive. It's a stark reminder that those enterprise capabilities come with a very, very significant enterprise price tag. So we really end up right back where we started, but now with a much, much clearer picture. The blueprint is laid out. This migration is absolutely possible. You can meticulously rebuild this AI bot inside an enterprise platform, but the question is no longer can it be done? The real question, the strategic question, is about the trade-offs. Is the benefit of having a standardized platform worth the enormous cost in time, in complexity, and in cold, hard dollars? And that is a strategic decision that goes way beyond the code.